There are so many myths, misconceptions, and misunderstandings about depression. It's borderline scary. And in many cases, these beliefs are not just held by the average person in the street, but often also by those that suffer with depression and even medical professionals. In this video, I'm going to address the most commonly held misconceptions about depression and explain why relegating these ideas to the category of outdated myth can actually help us move on from and even overcome our depression. I'm Tim Box, mind coach, and here are 4 widely held beliefs about depression that just aren't true. Okay, before we start, please hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more videos all about the best ways of managing your mental health. So why are there so many outdated or misguided ideas about depression? Could be down to uninformed posts on social media, perhaps a cultural over-reliance on Google for our information, or just the tendency we all have to repeat things we think we know, no matter how outdated or unreliable the source material might be. It happens, and none of us are immune to repeating stuff we've read or heard that just turned out to be rubbish. I mean, for a long time, I thought that Darth Vader quote was, "Luke, I am your father." Turns out, that's not what he said.
He told me you killed him. No, I am your father. No!
But for whatever reason, we've ended up with false beliefs about depression. Let's start getting rid of them. Okay, myth number 1, depression equals sadness. Now this is one that hopefully most people watching this video will know isn't the case, but it's worth including in this list because you'd be surprised how many people still regard depression to simply be a more extreme or persistent form of sadness. It doesn't help that the phrase, "that's depressing," seems to have become a fairly common way of expressing any form of displeasure these days. Not only can depression not simply be reduced to a feeling of sadness, it often doesn't feel anything like that. Rather than calling it sadness, depression is better described as the inability to see the possibility of any future happiness. As such, it often manifests as an emotional numbness, almost like your mind can't quite bring itself to trigger any emotion because what's the point? It's important to remember that our emotions are all designed to in some way steer us towards happiness. So fear will steer us away from danger, anger will inspire us to right any perceived wrong, and anxiety will focus our attention on the perceived important issues in our life. All these emotions are designed to keep us away from harm and move us towards the happiness we ultimately seek. This is why we can at times be in quite a dark place in our life, but continue to remain motivated and positive because we can see the light we're moving towards. It's seeing the light that helps us tolerate or even sometimes barely notice the darkness that surrounds us. Depression is when we haven't just lost sight of the light, but we've now concluded there isn't a light out there. Our mind stops triggering emotions at all because an emotional response would be only ever designed to steer us towards happiness. And if we don't believe happiness is out there, then all of that process just stops. This is why often the journey out of depression doesn't involve changing huge aspects of our life. After all, that can seem like a daunting task at times. It mainly involves seeing the possibility of changing something, maybe just one thing that will make a difference. As far as depression is concerned, it's the perceived possibility of change that's more important than the actual execution of it. Myth number 2, depression and anxiety go hand in hand. You'll very often hear people talk about depression and anxiety in the same breath, as if the two issues are synonymous or at least always manifest as a pair. And yes, experience tells us that this can be the case. However, there is always one that precedes and more than likely ends up causing the other. A common pattern here is for us to become highly anxious about some aspect of life, and when this state of high anxiety starts to seem permanent, we then become increasingly despairing about any hope of emerging the other side of it. It starts to challenge our prospects of future happiness. This can inevitably lead to a depressive outlook, and we start to shut down. It can also work the other way around though. We might for whatever reason develop depression, and we might then become increasingly anxious about our inability to see the positives and the persistence and insidious nature of our current reality. When we feel locked into a certain outlook, it can be distressing on a number of levels. The important thing to remember here is that the two issues manifest very differently. One is a shutdown of any emotion, and one is an overwhelm of too many. However, it is possible to vacillate quite quickly between these two and be in the midst of both responses at various different times. Having said all this, whilst we can go through anxiety and depression together, it's much more common in my experience to be dealing with just one at a time. Depression and anxiety don't inherently go hand in hand, but when they do, the good news is that one very much plays a part in originating the other. This means that once we update our responses to deal with one, we experience some large or small degree of collateral healing and end up emerging out the other side of both. Myth number 3, suicidal thoughts means we're suicidal. Okay, I strongly suggest you check out my video about intrusive thoughts for this one to get the full story here, but it's really not uncommon for our mind to throw us thoughts that feel challenging or even potentially dangerous. It's our mind going through the process of exploring options. Your subconscious is coming up with hundreds of potential courses of action every day, and most of them get rejected without us even consciously noticing. However, when we're struggling emotionally and mentally, it's quite natural for us to start paying more attention to the more serious or troubling thoughts, not least because we might be starting to question what it means that we're having them. But having these thoughts doesn't mean we're going to action them. They're just thoughts, and the fact that they scare us is a good thing. It means they go against our values and desires. Now, sometimes our mind will need to conceptualize certain ideas in order to confidently reject them. It's why when we stand at the top of the tall building, we have this weird thought about what it would be like to jump off. A part of us needs to do the predictive maths to inform us that this would be a bad idea. If we didn't know that jumping from this building would end badly, then we might accidentally do it without thinking. Now, similarly, if we've been through or are going through a tough time, then you can bet that at some point the options our mind explores include the more definitive ways we might end that struggle. It doesn't mean we want to end it all, we just want this pain to stop. Don't be alarmed that these thoughts exist, because at the end of the day, in some form, they have to. It just means your mind is working hard to present all the options, even the ones that are so far away from our nature and the action we actually want to take, that they scare us. Once we stop reading too much into these thoughts, then we soon stop noticing them so much, and our subconscious gets back to doing all this stuff in the background without even bothering us with it. Myth number 4, depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. Okay, so this last one is very much a bone of contention in the mental health community. In spite of the fact that this concept to many is pretty outdated now, you will still hear some people tell you that any depression is due to a chemical imbalance in the brain. Here's why we now know it isn't. First of all, there was never any robust scientific evidence proving or even suggesting that depression was caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. And contrary to popular belief, this idea was never actually pushed by the psychiatric profession as the catch-all cause of depression. What was suggested was that there were 3 main contributing factors at play in terms of depression and its causes: physiological, psychological, and environmental. The physiological elements of depression in terms of our brain chemistry were naturally pushed hard by pharmaceutical companies, and our local doctor will talk in these terms because that's where they can help by prescribing you medication. And by the way, I'm not trying to dismiss medication here. So many people have benefited from medication, it would be crazy to dismiss it. My point is, it was the makers of the medication that presented it as the ultimate solution, not the medical profession. I'll let you draw your own conclusions about that. However, the latest and best research suggests that the chemical or biological elements play a very small part in deciding whether or not you suffer with depression. Psychological and environmental factors play a much larger part. From my point of view, as a full-time professional therapist, in the 12 or so years I've been seeing clients, I've asked nearly all of them if they've ever suffered with any depression. Just under half of them have said they have, and it's then taken less than a few minutes to work out what it was that caused them to feel this way, and it's never a chemical imbalance in the brain. This is good news, because the biggest barrier we hit when we're trying to recover from a depressive period in our life is the idea that we are in some way biologically predisposed to feeling depressed. This just isn't the case. Our brain is constantly rewiring and creating new and different connections based on the information received via our 5 senses and our current cognitive filters. This is why we can influence how we feel and think, and why any depressive period is always in response to something that we've been or are currently going through. What this means is that the way we currently feel does not tell the story of who we are, not even when we feel mired in depression, and not even if we felt that way for a long time. So please, no matter what you're going through right now, and I know it can feel like there's no light on the horizon, please always remember that there is hope and there is more of life to be discovered. I probably can't claim to be able to shine a light into your life in a 10-minute YouTube video, but I can assure you there is a light out there, and if we keep going, we will find it. Okay, so that's 4 commonly held misconceptions about depression. I hope you've got something from this video. What do you think? Was it valuable? Did it help you understand depression a little better? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if any of the information has been useful to you, then why not subscribe for more content about the mind, how it works, and how we get it working a little better. Okay, that's it for now. I'm Tim Box, Mind Coach. Always remember to be kind to your mind. I'll see you next time.